what can I do for the health of my mind to get me to this place of feeling aligned, confident, and in a happier state more days than not? Because then if that's happening, everything else cascades from there.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large. You just heard from Marc Champagne, the best-selling author of Personal Socrates and host of the Behind the Human podcast. Marc describes himself as a mental fitness strategist, speaking and consulting for Fortune 500 companies on work and well-being. So here's an obvious truth. We don't tend to make the best decisions when we operate from a survival mindset, which is why Marc highlights the importance of nourishing the mind with personalized practices. And by clearing the clutter and allowing the mind to reset, we can show up as our best selves. Marc talks about how constant self-reflection can improve the mental fitness of teams and individuals and share steps for getting there. But first, we kick off our conversation with my favorite question about consciousness. Conscious Habit listeners, I am so excited to be with our guest today, Marc Champagne. Marc has this cool vibe that the minute he and I met, I was like, yep, I like this dude. Platinum hair, yellow glasses. It's a cool vibe. And the thing about Marc, and I have some other friends I put in this category too, when you're around people who are so aligned with themselves, it makes you feel more comfortable being yourself. And I felt that immediately. He is a podcast host. He is a mindset coach. He's got a book. The minute it showed up in my mailbox, I was like, damn, Marc, this is some impressive packaging. I can't wait to read the book. And he has so many good insights that I cannot wait for you to hear today. Marc Champagne, welcome to the Conscious Habit Podcast.
What an introduction. Thank you for those beautiful words. I am going to replay that whole intro to my wife. I'll take it all. Thank you so much for having me.
Marc, I just love to flow and learn from our guests who are on. I really just sit like a listener, even though I get to live in this world and do some fun work too. I love to learn from experts like you. There's only one question that I ever ask every single time, and that is, what does consciousness mean to you?
I love the question because I think the answer to that question, if you're putting in the work, will evolve over time. So if I answer that question, and which is interesting because I ask every guest, who are you? It's the same thing. I think that answer evolves over time and it usually gets people to kick back their chair and really think. And I think this one does the same. So for me today, consciousness is presence and just being tapped in as much as possible for us to be here together and really present to the conversation. I think this happens in preventative mental fitness and other things that we're doing, but to be able to block out anything else that may be going on. Like when you're with your kids and when you're with your team members and so forth, there's no shortage of distractions and threats and things that worry us that are always coming to our minds. But if we're present to our consciousness and what we're allowing in and out consciously, then we can make those micro adjustments to live the life that we want to live and be the person that we want to be.
I love that. And I love that you said it evolves. That is such a good reflection of what I think it is today. That is proof of our evolution. I think many people struggle with burnout, work life balance, all of those things. And it makes me wonder, is it a lack of presence on top of all the other things? Is that at the catalyst? And I used to say, wherever your feet are, put your head there. Just be present in the space that you're holding. What is your habit or practice to ensure that you are as present as you possibly can be?
It's definitely a mix of different practices based on at least intuitively what I feel I need. This is for me and most likely others as well. Any kind of time in nature to just reset and walk. I did this week. My mind felt like it was spinning. There's a lot going on, many projects and so forth. And instead of doing the spin class I would have normally done that morning, I feel like I need to just take a hike or walk in the forest without anything in my ears, no podcasts, no audiobooks, and just be and let the forest and nature work its magic. And we're not talking hours in the forest. I'm talking 20 minutes. So it's accessible. And by the time I got to the end of that, I felt a hell of a lot better and I was ready to take on the day. and the priorities and the tasks and so forth. So that's always my go-to when things feel really heavy. But I would say that the practice that's most consistent so that I don't have as many of those heavy moments is journaling. I'm talking about just taking time to pull what's stewing around in your head and pull it and pop it onto a page and release that and make some decisions from a place of stillness and a place of clarity, which happens to be one of the biggest themes, what I would call just exceptional thinkers in this world across all industries. I'll just take a minute. What am I hearing right now? What am I hearing in the whispers? What's coming up? What are the projects I'm working on? And just even seeing that all on a page. And then it just feels like a mental weight is just pulled off of you because all of a sudden now you've zoomed out essentially. You're seeing everything, you've got a plan that you can put in front of you. And all of that stuff leads to, okay, when I'm in conversation with someone like yourself, I'm not thinking about all those other things because I've taken the time to pull that out of the head and declutter the mind. Those are two big ones. The third one I think that's probably applicable to anyone is to really be conscious and intentional about your content diet. Are you nourishing your mind with good stuff? Just like if we nourish our body with healthy food, it's going to result in typically a healthier lifestyle and us feeling good and be able to move and function. And the flip side is equally as true. If we don't, disease starts to show up and we just have problems. Same thing with our minds. We don't obviously tend to look at that as clearly. It's not that I don't read the news, but I don't read the news to start my day, or I don't fire up social media to start my day. I'm very intentional books, something usually related to mindset or personal development, and then something usually related to a project that I'm working on to learn. It's impossible not to come out of that feeling inspired and in the right mindset for the day. Or as the coffee's brewing, I typically have some sort of stoic philosophy book or mindset stuff leaning against the coffee machine. So as it's brewing, I'm just reading a couple pages.
I love that. So, nature, journaling, and conscious consumption. This is a good chance for reflection. This is a chance for consciousness. What are you spending your time listening to? Obviously, you're listening to this podcast. Well done. Great choice. We love that for you. But what are the other things that you're consuming? I think it was this year. I was traveling to give a keynote and it was close enough that I could drive. And do you know what I chose to listen to, which is not really something I usually do? It was true crime podcast. And I was binging true crime and it was entertaining as hell. I was just entertained by the serial killers and the horror and the gore. And then I get to my hotel room and I realized that I was nervous about being by myself. And now I'm wondering about, do I need to triple lock? And what if somebody tries to get in? How quickly just what we consume changes our behavior and the way we see the world. We got to protect that.
I wish this wasn't the case. We have to be realistic with the environment that we live in. We're just surrounded by a lot of negativity and a lot of fear and scare tactics just nonstop with media and all of the narratives running out there. Like, we're going to be in the worst recession ever. If you stay in that mindset, of course, you're not going to thrive. It's just inevitable. I'm not saying that we're not living in hard times. We can accept that. But if we accept the mindset that goes with listening to that, then we're just going to follow the autopilot of that disaster. That's not what people that are innovating at the top are doing. What I love about all of this is you don't have to go on a 7-day silent retreat to tap into this kind of stuff, even just podcasts. Take a look at what you're subscribed to. And not to say that the true crime, there isn't a place for that, but maybe on the way to that keynote, listening to something like Smartless that's just going to make you laugh and relax the mind is just a better option. And just having that set up for when you need whatever you need. And sometimes you need something motivational, and sometimes you need something educational or smartless, something just to laugh and relax and calm the mind. That's there for you. It's part of your toolkit now.
I think part of what I'm hearing you say too, which is totally your jam, and I'm excited for you to share with the listeners, is it requires some presence. It requires really good questions to ask yourself so you can come up with better answers, which, spoiler alert, that is what Mark's book is all about, Personal Socrates. I am a lover of Stoicism and just what it stands for and the various principles. And your entire book is about solid questions and what can come from it. And then I loved how every chapter ended with those one liners that just stick with you. Where for you in your journey did this sort of desire to be present, conscious, curious, operate from a higher level of being? Where did that start for you?
That's a good question. It's definitely over time, and I definitely stand behind that point about how consciousness and being present and all of that evolves. Just even hearing how you introduced me, it landed in the heart because for me to hear something being around someone that feels very aligned, that's taken a hell of a lot of work. And I'm still on that journey, of course, but 5 years ago, I'd say probably not so much. I was just trying to survive essentially and trying to make a business work in this space, a journaling app that reached a bunch of people, but ultimately financially failed. And it was during that time where everything felt hopeless that I had to really rely on any of the mental fitness practices that I had available at that time to clear out my own mind and for brief moments come out of survival thinking and just being in that thriving state where, okay, well, wait a second, I can go do this, I can talk to this person. And now all of a sudden a plan is starting to materialize. And then survival mode starts to kick back in. How am I going to pay rent? What's going to happen? Is my 2-year old picking up on this stress? This happens. And I think most of us go in and out of that phase. So for me, it was just always applying some sort of practice to start the day or a stack of practices to start the day, to release, to check in, and then nourish the mind. And that over time, all of a sudden, and this is what I feel like I'm living right now. Okay, well, that project there seems really shiny and exciting, but it's not necessarily where I need to be heading based on the fact that my ultimate goal and mission is just to make mental fitness practices more accessible to the masses. So, what does that look like? And then all of a sudden you become clear. I'm like, okay, that's the path right there. And the right people start to show up. That's how the book came about. The publishing deal was, of course, I'm going to do that with you. We've been speaking for 4 years about other projects. It was so clear that they needed to be the ones behind the podcast. And the same thing is happening right now with this TV series I'm working on and these other limited podcast runs. They're just the right topics and the right people are coming to surround the projects. It just takes consistency. Like anything, it's training. It's no different than physical fitness. If you're training for the marathon, it's the daily runs and the stretching and the strength training that will get you to that point where you feel confident in the race to put in your best effort.
I love that. I think many of us who are called to do work like this, we had our sit in the shit time where we were like, this is hard and it sucks. And there was gratefully some epiphany that came. I don't think grinding alone is going to get me out of this. And there may be some people now, they're fully in the grind, but they're missing that connection with the mental. And I'm curious of your take on this, like the spiritual aspect of like tapping into that deeper part of themselves, that deeper essence, that stronger intuition. They're just in the grind. And so, what was it for you that kept you out where you're like, grinding's not going to do it? I've got to do this personal work.
It was reading and studying and interviewing a bunch of really smart people that those themes kept coming up. They're running these billion-dollar organizations and they're making these decisions not from a place of survival mode. They're making it from a place of, okay, we have some data, but then also what feels right in this situation. Really hard to answer that from a place of when you feel super stressed and a bunch of anxiety. So that's where you need to take the 15-minute walk and just clear out the mind. Just like when you go for a run and ideas start to pop or you're in the shower. Well, it's because the mind is in a calmer state. You're not racing it. You're giving it some time to think. For me, that was the nourishment part of it. And then it was just being very consistent. I remember this gym membership that I had at a YMCA here in Toronto, and I couldn't afford it, but it was the only thing that I was going to not cancel in that hardest time because at least I could go there, move the body, feel good about that. And the biggest thing is in the change room, they had a sauna. So I would end with the sauna and do some visualization to see where I'm trying to head, essentially, like see the person that I'm striving to become. At that time, I was just doing freelance strategy gigs to bridge the gap from shutting down the main business to kind of where I'm at now. Like any entrepreneur or any business leader listening, it's hard. Sometimes it's not stable. It's typically up and down, at least at the beginning. So when my mind would flip there, then I could go back to that clarity on I know I'm not where I want to be at this point, but I'm taking actions. I'm making progress, mini steps to get to where the objective is, just like we would do with launching a product. It's like we're here today, and by the end of the year, here are the financial results we're chasing. Here's the brand strategy. And the tactics within the rest of the 12 months are either going to get us closer to that objective or they're going to push us farther away. What can I do for the health of my mind to get me to this place of feeling aligned, confident, and in a happier state more days than not? Because then, if that's happening, everything else cascades from there.
I love that. As soon as you said that, I was like, yes. Why is it so easy to be okay with iteration after iteration of products, but we don't see that we are in ourselves an iteration? And I think part of this journey is learning to know that's normal and there's nothing wrong with you and it's okay. And that's proof of growth. And you can love the hell out of yourself and evolve at the same time.
And you can be excited about the iterations that you don't even know are about to come. I think that's the other one that has been a big shift for me because before it would have been more of a fear and worry around the uncertainty and the unknown of where am I going to be on 6 to 12 months or next year. And you just have to prove this to yourself along the journey. And this is where the reflection comes in. You can start thinking, like, what happened this year that were the highlights? And did I plan for those? Often you didn't. They happen typically aligned with some sort of vision, but the exact details are never what we anticipate. So now you're proving to yourself that the unknown, the unexpected can be really awesome as well. And then when you start to become excited about that, more of that happens.
Clearly, you are living out the work that you do in the world. And I think that speaks to the authenticity in you because clearly you practice what you preach. You're doing it. Tell us a little bit more about the work that has found you and you have found in the world and what geeks you out right now.
The thing that excites me the most is for sure exploring like different modalities and mediums and whatnot to essentially help our minds thrive. For me, when I think of mental fitness, it's just the umbrella definition is anything that we do to train our minds to work for us instead of against us encompasses mental fitness, which then opens it up to a lot of different things. And just like physical fitness, you could stack in different exercises and different training routines and whatnot to get to whatever your goal is. And what's fun about mental fitness and where I'm geeking out is using things like guided breath work. I'll add in some visualization of whatever I'm working towards, or I'll check in on the hold. I'll mentally answer a question like, what was great about this week? Or how do I want to show up today, for example? And leverage the health, but also the mindset benefits of actually doing the breath work and calming the mind and helping still just the body in general, and then answering those questions from a deeper place or doing those visualizations from a deeper place. And then now I have this infrared sauna blanket that I've been playing with. So I've put all of that now in the blanket because I'm not in the same location. I don't have that same access to the physical sauna. The next best thing is this infrared sauna blanket, which has been incredible just physically as well. But now I've got essentially three practices stacked into one. And after 15 or 20 minutes of doing this, I feel like $1 million ready to start the day. So just playing with these different things and not being so rigid with the practices. Perfect examples, as I hear this often, and I was one of these people, and I just gave up the meditation thing because I used to hear this all the time. People are like, I've really got to get my meditation in. Just even the way you're speaking about that is defeating the purpose of the meditation if you're stressed about getting the meditation in. I've tried all the apps and whatnot. And for whatever reason, I know the science is super solid on meditation and it is a practice that comes up over and over again in the interviews. It's just not my jam. So instead of doing that, I'm doing the breath work and I've got the journaling and trying the visualization practices and whatnot. So instead of just being so hard on myself, I'll just play with ones that feel right. I felt like I needed to go for a walk in nature. Sure, I'm not going to burn 500 calories spinning and pump my cardio that day, but what I felt like I needed was a release in the mind, and nature for sure was going to do that. And just being okay, being flexible with ourselves.
I see this theme. Here's what I hear: playful and curiosity. Play with it, mold it, figure it out. And I call that the formula for feeling good. What is my formula for feeling good? What do I need right now to ensure that I'm going to approach my day better, clearer minded, more open heart, whatever the goal is for you? I went through hundreds of hours to become certified as a meditation teacher. We learned breath work is meditation, mantra is meditation. Visualization is meditation. So there's all these modalities. I love that you've opened up like this doesn't work for me, so I don't need to do it. I'm going to find what does work for me. We've had experts who have shared that. That's been a theme. So clearly it's so important that all of us are just curious and play around with what makes me feel good. It isn't just going to be brought to us and dropped in our lap and somebody's going to be like, here's what you have to do. We've got to lean in and be curious and practice and play and see what really resonates.
And you stay more consistent like that. The question for this one is a pretty simple one. Like, what are 3 to 5 practices, rituals, activities, or things that I can do without a shadow of a doubt when I do these things, I feel good after? So now it's very personalized. You can take what we're talking about as inspiration, be like, oh, maybe I want to try the breath work or meditation is my thing. But it might be the walk, it might be taking time in an art gallery or whatever that thing is. But it's personalized to you, and even just knowing that you have that toolkit for when shit hits the fan, okay, I don't need to sit in this mental torture. I can take 5 minutes and just breathe and reset. Just knowing that you have that at your disposal often just releases a lot of mental tension.
What a gift, just knowing that the shit's gonna come. It's life. We've got it. If you figure this out when you're in the midst of it, you may be able to shift perspective or overcome quicker. The problem may still remain, but the suffering attached to the problem may have a chance to shift faster.
Yeah. It's how can I be comfortable and thrive in chaos? We live in chaos. Let's just be honest with that. There's chaos everywhere. So I've lost a bit of hope that we're going to change that because that's been the theme for all of humanity. And we can't control that. So what we can control is how we react to that environment. And what we can control is how we stack our practices and our training to be able to just zoom out of that and focus on the controllables of living and working in this chaotic environment. It sounds so simplistic because we try to like complexify everything all the time. But it really is simple. When you can do that, then you see the path forward. And then usually that path is what will lead you to a thriving state or a thriving business, thriving brand, because the majority of people are stuck in the chaos and they can't see that path because they're in survival mode.
I'll go back to that theme of being playful and asking questions. And that is the basis of your work. And so just share with us a little bit about what you're doing with teams and the kind of people that come to you. Like, what is it that causes people to say, hey, Mark, I would love to talk to you about working with me or working with us?
What's coming up the most right now are teams that ironically are performing from a financial state quite well, but the morale and the culture is just shot. They've been pushed to the max. Obviously, there's a lot that has taken place over the last 2, 3 years, and a lot of disruption and uncertainty and just change and all of that. And the majority of people in teams, at least from what I see, don't have the tools to be able to handle that. And what's even worse, something like the pandemic has forced so many people into reflection. So now they're asking some big questions and left with, what do I do now? Now that I know that something feels off or that I'm not on the right path, that's just a whole other level of mental clutter. And you're just soaking up so much real estate in your mind. No wonder we have alarming rates of mental health out there. It's no surprise. For the most part, often people would say, hey, can we provide access to some of these tools and just show people what's possible? Which then leads into, wait a second, like we can actually integrate this very specifically in other use cases within the organization. And as an example, I worked with a pretty large brand that went through a huge North American restructure. And they weren't necessarily letting people go, but people were being shuffled around and they had no idea where they were going to land. And then obviously some people would leave from that. So there's just a lot of mental stress. And we had already done an introduction to what mental fitness is and how you can start layering in these practices into your routine. But then it became, okay, well, when I'm going to go into an internal interview, which practices can I tailor so that I do an exceptional job in this interview flow since I'm going into these new positions? And also, not show up feeling nervous and uncertain and terrified and showing up confident and ready to go. This is the same thing I've worked with in investment funds for their founders when they go in to pitch for big amounts of money. You can tell when someone is anxious and doesn't feel confident pitching. And here you are, for the most part, in that scenario, the whole company future relies on you landing these rounds of investment. So it's just starting with understanding what is possible with mental fitness and how this can apply to any of us, and then starting to really tailor and go a little bit deeper based on whatever's happening within that team.
So let's maybe throw like an example out there and we can play around with it. Because what I'm hearing a lot, and it sounds like it's similar to what you were saying, is there's a lot of change and uncertainty happening in organizations. And again, maybe it's coming from restructuring. Maybe they have had to do some downsizing. Maybe they're liquidating or selling off certain locations or whatever. And so let's say that I work for an organization with a lot of uncertainty. Where do I start? What is the best place to just begin to get my head in the game and out of this playing the fear?
I think we have to first start with some radical transparency and honesty as leaders with what the team has gone through. Instead of bringing in an inspirational Olympian to come pump up the team, which will work in the moment, we have to first acknowledge the elephant in the room that it was really shitty the last 2 years. And let's just acknowledge that as a team. Let's talk about how that felt. You don't have to share that with all of your colleagues, but let's use the journaling together and pull it out independently or individually. And we can all do this in one room. I've done this a ton of times where there's 100 people there and it doesn't take very long, but let's leverage the practices. I'll get people to do some breath work to start off. So again, we're all at the same place and we're calm to be able to answer these questions from a deeper place. Acknowledge that and then help people let that stuff go so that then we can get to questions like, how do I want to show up for the rest of the year for myself and for this team? And what does that look and feel like? What will I be celebrating at the end of the year? Put that intention out there. Then it's all a matter about checking in again. And this is where the integration comes in because it could be a one and done situation. There has to be some consistency there because it's got to live on. So we can get pumped up and we can pull that message and remind ourselves, but it's got to be linked to, okay, well, where do I want to be at the end of this year? You pick your timeline. Then we can start checking in. Okay, well, what I did this week, did that move me closer to that objective of whether it's financial objectives or progress? And then also how I want to feel. Did I move closer or farther away? And guess what? We get another week to readjust. That's not the end of the world if it was a bad week or something was off. And you also get another day to do it. You've heard this one before. Today is a new day. It is, right? So let's leverage that stuff. So I don't talk about this from a mental health perspective and it's fitness because it doesn't have to be so heavy. And we have so much at our disposal that we can do ourselves to feel like we have more control over our own destiny. We just need to take some time to think and bring in the things that work well and put us in that happy state. If you need a reminder as a parent out there, just take a look at your kids. They don't give a shit what's going on. It's all about putting a smile on your face. That's what they do. And they're curious. We were all at that phase in our life at one point. So we can all go back there. It's possible. We've all been there.
And the answers are within you. That's what I love so much about your practice and having people go within, centering themselves. I love the radical acknowledgement. I always say, like, where is the elephant in the room? Let's put a saddle on that bitch and ride it around a little bit. Let's have some fun with that. What is the importance behind the acknowledgement and not just jumping to, let's go straight positive and let's go motivational? And what is the importance of the acknowledgement in the process?
If I can paint a picture, let's imagine a spare room in your house that is full of boxes and stuff jammed floor to ceiling. And you have to go retrieve something. You open the door and like it's in here somewhere, but I've got to essentially empty out the room and try to navigate a path to get to this thing. You'll get there, but it's going to be torturous and it's going to take way more time and resources to do that. So you can set the intention of we want to be here and I want to be at this place and be very clear with that. But if you have to run through that jammed up room every time, it's going to be exhausting and it's going to take a hell of a lot longer to get there. So let's acknowledge the fact that the room is a mess right now and let's just clean it up. I was doing this before, but it really crystallized from studying Phil Jackson, at the time the Chicago Bulls coach. And it was in watching The Last Dance, his documentary, which profiled one of the most prolific teams of that time, Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen, and they were winning championships back to back. But then there was a moment where they were all leaving. So the team was dissolving. So on the last practice, instead of just doing a celebration dinner or whatever it was, Phil asked each player to bring on a piece of paper what the team meant to them. And he grabbed those pieces of paper and he put them in a tin cup and he set it on fire. And I remember Steve Kerr, one of the players, said it was the most powerful thing he had ever experienced from a coach and in a practice because all those players were leaving for different reasons. But Phil allowed them to break free mentally from the past history of the Chicago Bulls, good or bad. And it just allowed that transition to happen and to lighten their minds and not just pull out the stuff that might then be affecting how they're going to show up and play in other teams, just like that's going to affect how we show up for ourselves and move forward.
That's powerful. The visual that's coming to mind is like we can't claw our ways to self actualization with shackles on our feet. And so when we bring in somebody who is inspiring, you have to acknowledge the shit. So the acknowledgement and then the curiosity, and just break down sort of the science, the importance in that mental fitness of just asking good questions. What does that do for us? What is it igniting?
Science is not my area of expertise. Maybe I need to be more well versed, but I'm just of the flavor that just try this and you'll see it's going to work. And I've been proven over and over again, especially with 300 plus interviews, that, okay, well, they're all doing the same thing. The only one I know is that any type of gratitude questions will fire up a beautiful neurochemical cocktail of serotonin and dopamine, which are all the feel good emotions. And you can't be grateful and upset at the same time. So that's one of them. There's a bunch of stats. I don't want to get them wrong, but I think you're 30 or 50% more likely to perform better and see better results just by working on your self esteem, which is a lot of mindset and clearing out a lot of that mental clutter and then just having confidence and so forth. Productivity, of course. Just think about it logically. When you don't feel good, even physically, let's say you have the flu, is that when you come up with your best ideas? Even though it may not feel like we're nauseous or we're having all these other aches and pains, we put our minds through basically 12-hour high intensity workouts daily, or at least 5 days a week, and often don't have any kind of recovery and expect that our minds will just keep going. It's like you're driving the car to the ground without any oil changes or any maintenance, nothing. That's the philosophy that I like to operate. There's a bunch of science that supports it, but just think of it logically. If we run ourselves down, surely it can't lead to a good outcome. And just to take small steps to build in rest and recovery. Typically, it's those practices that you identified or time with family so that when you are in those high intensity sprints or moments where maybe you're on a product launch team, you can have sustained performance. And it's not just, I'm going to go all in until I get to the vacation. And then I'm going to reset for 5 days, but then I'm going to put myself into the same craziness. Like just build in some small moments, the 10-minute walk after lunch or something, or a bit of inspirational reading, a little bit of meditation or breath work, so that it's not like we're always living for the big reset, the big vacation. Then all of a sudden you start to feel it.
Yeah, that's exhausting to think about. I think the average person here gets 2 weeks vacation maybe, so just like 2 weeks a year that I get to feel free or just waiting for Saturday, and so it really is this delayed satisfaction. What are the most powerful questions in your mind? Maybe they're ones you're currently using for yourself, or maybe they're ones that you are also advocating other people to use. What are those questions that you would encourage listeners to ask themselves on a consistent basis?
I think set yourself up for success on this one. Just go do something that feels good and that gives you some time by yourself to actually ask this question because it's a big one, but it doesn't have to be a scary one. It can be a fun one and inspiring one. And that is, who is my best self? Who is that person? What are the characteristics? To make it even easier to answer, think about the people that you really respect and look up to. What are the qualities that make them a beacon for you? What are the things that you would want to emulate? And you might already have some of those aspects to who you are today, but again, that evolves and we're always trying to evolve in some capacity. And from that place, what does my ideal life look like? From the moment you wake up to the moment your head hits the pillow. Don't judge the answers. There's nothing stopping you for writing down your wildest, most audacious dreams and goals. No rules here. Just go there. Allow your mind to open up and be in that innovative, curious space. There'll be plenty of time for us to kind of shrink it down a little bit to be a little bit more realistic, but at least start from a place of wide open. If we can then acknowledge and understand who we're striving to be and become, then when you start to check in, how do I feel today? One word. And understand, okay, well, if I feel stress, what's causing that stress? And can I cut the fuel source from that? That takes 2, 3 minutes. Just acknowledge those feelings and where that may be coming from. You can do that because whether you're asking those questions or not, you're rolling in the day with those emotions and they affect everything. They affect how you show up, how you speak, your energy, all of that. So we can release some of that stuff. And it's a moment to check in to see, okay, did I do the things today that are getting me closer to that ideal self and the life that I want to live or the business I want to run? And the answer is yes or no. Again, if it's no, we've got tomorrow to reassess or reset essentially, or we've got next week. I'm going to take a look at this week and see what went well and what didn't go well and what I learned and see, okay, well, based on that, did I stack the deck in my favor in terms of how I'm spending my time? Or am I going to be in the same place next Friday that I am right now if there's something that's off? And it's just those small little adjustments that we all have control that then get us closer, coming full circle to make us feel aligned.
I'm going to do that exercise. I'm holding myself accountable. And it's probably one that we should look at consistently, right? Because who we want to be, like there's that evolution that we talked about when we kicked off today. And how incredible to be curious on how am I feeling? Because it's easier to make a 1 degree turn than it is to make a 180. Mark, I could spend hours talking to you. I feel that with many guests that I get the pleasure of interviewing, where I'm like, I just want to keep learning. Can I have like a 2 full day workshop of Mark? I'm really grateful that you spent minutes here on the Conscious Habit podcast and you shared some really damn good stuff. I've got some to dos on mine, and I encourage listeners to grab your book. Where else can our listeners find you, Mark?
Thank you, Amy. The feelings are mutual. I had a blast. Great questions. You made me think, which is on my side, the greatest gift I can get from anyone. So thank you for that. The easiest place to find me is just behindthehuman.com. That's my main site. The podcast is there, the book's there, and everything else that I'm up to with teams and so forth. So say hi. Let me know which questions have been influential in your life and just tag me wherever you share those because I will absolutely reshare it because someone on the other side will have benefit from that question as well. And you'll see this if you pick up the book. I really do believe this. We're really all one question away from a completely different life or mental state at any point. I think we all deserve to thrive and feel good and enjoy the ride.
Amazing. Enjoy the ride. Thank you, Mark. Before we wrap up this episode, here are my 3 takeaways from Mark and how we can incorporate them into our lives. Okay, spoiler. There's more than 3 here. I was looking back at Mark's book, Personal Socrates. Highly encourage you all to pick it up. It's one of those books that you could just read one chapter at a time or even flip to a single page, look at a question, and use that as a way to frame your curiosity for the day. I think my biggest takeaway from Mark is just ask good questions. We have access to so much wisdom and insight when we just ask ourselves better questions. And at the end of Mark's book, he highlights some of his own practices and what he leans into. And I particularly loved how he looks back at his calendar. Right now, wherever you are, whatever month you're listening to this, just reflect upon the year where it stands. Or maybe it's the year before for you. Look back at the last 12 months. And what Mark encourages is that we look at our calendar, we look at our journals, we look at our pictures, and we get curious. We ask ourselves, what did I learn? What a great question. Simple, but with a lot of insight. What did I learn over the last 12 months? What a great way to encourage a growth mindset to ensure, did I learn something about myself, my work, my passions, the people I love? What did I learn? Another question that really stuck out to me was, what was amazing? If you are a high achiever, and my gut says you probably are because you're listening to a podcast like Conscious Habit and looking at like, how can I grow? What can I learn? How can I get better? But we often are looking at what's ahead instead of reflecting upon how good we've had it as we've come along or a lot of the amazing things that are in our midst. And so what a great question to ask there. What was amazing? And then following up with this next question, what made me the happiest? What if we were able to frame our calendar around those things that we deem to be important and that lent to happiness? And then lastly, what did I ignore? That one can sting a little bit, but sometimes the most challenging answers are the ones we need the most. What did I ignore? Was it certain relationships? Was it a relationship with myself? Was it having tough conversations? Did I avoid the gym? Did I avoid taking care of my mind, body, and spirit? Those questions are phenomenal. And maybe you come up with more, but I think that exercise that Mark shares in the book of reflecting over the last 12 months and just getting curious can help us figure out how we continue to lead a life that we love. There is no point in simply existing. We are here to live. Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.